this episode, we're going to focus on what happens after something suspicious is found, when the goal shifts from noticing an alert to understanding what actually occurred. Incident artifacts are the breadcrumbs an attack leaves behind, and they can include files, emails, scripts, logs, network traces, memory clues, and even patterns in the way something was written. For brand new learners, it can feel like artifact analysis is only for elite specialists, but the core mindset is much simpler than it sounds. You gather evidence, you test it safely, you extract what's useful, and you build a clearer story about the attacker's behavior. The reason this matters is that good artifact analysis reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is what causes teams to either overreact and break things or underreact and leave attackers in place. Today, you'll learn 4 major ideas that support a practical, defensible analysis workflow: sandboxing, IoC extraction, stylometry, and reverse engineering, along with how they fit together as part of one coherent investigative approach. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Once you accept that artifacts are evidence, the first discipline you need is to preserve the difference between what you know and what you suspect. A file might be malicious, or it might be a legitimate tool used in a suspicious way, and your job is to test that claim without damaging the environment or contaminating the evidence. Beginners sometimes jump straight to deleting a suspicious file or rebooting a system, but that can erase valuable clues about how the file arrived and what it did. A calmer approach is to treat artifacts like a detective treats physical evidence, where you handle it carefully, record what you observed, and avoid changing it unnecessarily before you understand it. This mindset also helps you communicate more clearly, because you can explain what the artifact is, where it came from, and why you believe it is connected to an incident. Artifact analysis is not just about technical curiosity. It is about reducing risk by confirming whether you are dealing with a harmless anomaly, an attempted attack that failed, or a successful compromise. That distinction guides containment, recovery, and the changes you recommend afterward. A key early step in artifact analysis is deciding what kind of artifact you have and what questions it can answer. A suspicious email can answer how the attack began and which users were targeted, while a suspicious executable can answer what capabilities the attacker tried to run. A set of logs can show the timeline of actions, while a network trace can show external communication patterns. Beginners sometimes assume every artifact must be deeply analyzed, but the more practical skill is choosing the right level of analysis for the decision you must make. If the urgent question is whether the artifact is actively dangerous, you may prioritize rapid behavioral assessment. If the question is whether the artifact indicates a broader campaign, you may prioritize extracting identifiers and patterns that can be searched across the enterprise. If the question is how the attacker achieved persistence, you may focus on configuration changes and execution paths rather than on the file itself. This is why artifact analysis is often iterative. You answer one question, then choose the next question based on what you learned. The goal is not to study everything, but to study what reduces uncertainty and guides action. Sandboxing is one of the most common ways defenders safely learn what a suspicious file or link is trying to do, because it creates a controlled environment where behavior can be observed. At a high level, a sandbox is an isolated space that imitates a real system well enough for the suspicious content to run, while limiting its ability to harm real assets. Beginners sometimes think sandboxing is the same as simply opening a file on a spare computer, but true sandboxing emphasizes containment, repeatability, and observation. You want to see what processes start, what files are created, what network destinations are contacted, and what changes are attempted, all while keeping the activity from spreading. Another important concept is that sandbox results are evidence, not a verdict, because some malicious programs behave differently when they detect they are being watched. Even with that limitation, sandboxing often provides quick, high-value clues about intent, such as whether a document tries to launch a script, whether an executable tries to connect outward, or whether something attempts to modify security settings. When used thoughtfully, sandboxing helps you move from guessing to observing. Behavioral observation in a sandbox becomes most useful when you interpret it with a defender's questions rather than with excitement about flashy outputs. If a file spawns a new process chain, you ask whether that chain makes sense for the file type and whether it resembles common attack patterns. If the artifact reaches out to the internet, you ask what kind of destinations it contacts and whether it downloads additional content, because many attacks use a small initial file to fetch larger payloads later. If it edits configuration or schedules tasks, you ask whether those changes look like persistence, meaning the attacker wants the code to run again after reboot or later on a schedule. Beginners sometimes assume a sandbox must show obvious malicious behavior like deleting files, but many threats are quieter, focusing on credential theft, reconnaissance, or establishing a foothold. A good sandbox analysis, therefore, includes both what happened and what did not happen, because absence can be meaningful. If the artifact does nothing, you consider whether it requires specific conditions, a specific environment, or a human action that the sandbox did not replicate. This keeps the analysis honest and prevents false confidence. IoC extraction is the practice of pulling out the identifiers and patterns that can help you find related activity across systems, and it is one of the fastest ways artifact analysis turns into enterprise-level defense. An IoC might be a domain name contacted by malware, a file hash, a file name pattern, a registry key, a process name, or a distinctive command sequence. Beginners sometimes assume an IoC is always a perfect indicator of compromise, but it is better understood as a clue that should be combined with context. Some indicators are high confidence, like a specific hash tied to a known malicious file, while others can be low confidence, like a common file name that could appear in legitimate software. The art of IoC extraction is choosing which indicators are specific enough to be useful and fresh enough to be relevant, because attacker infrastructure and files can change quickly. IoC extraction also helps you pivot, meaning you take one clue and use it to search for more, such as taking a suspicious domain and searching for any internal systems that connected to it. This is how you expand from one incident artifact into a broader understanding of scope. A practical way to think about IoC extraction is that it converts a single artifact into a set of search keys for your monitoring data. If you only know that a suspicious file existed on one laptop, your investigation stays narrow. But if you extract its network destinations, its created files, and its execution pattern, you can search for those across many devices. Beginners should also understand that extracted indicators often need normalization, because the same underlying item can be represented differently in different logs, such as different casing, different formatting, or different naming conventions. Another important point is that indicators have lifetimes, because attackers can abandon infrastructure, rotate domains, and recompile malware to change hashes. This means you should treat IoC extraction as both immediate and time-sensitive, using the most useful indicators quickly and then reviewing their value later. IoC extraction also supports communication, because you can share concrete artifacts with responders and stakeholders, helping them understand what was observed without needing to read a full technical report. Done well, it makes the incident response faster, clearer, and less dependent on vague descriptions. Stylometry is a less familiar concept to many beginners, but it provides a powerful reminder that artifact analysis is not always about code and binaries. Stylometry is the study of writing style patterns, and in security, it can help you analyze phishing messages, extortion notes, support scam scripts, and other written artifacts for clues about origin, consistency, and linkage. The goal is not to magically identify a specific person, but to notice patterns that suggest whether two messages are likely from the same source or whether a message resembles a known campaign. Clues can include phrasing habits, punctuation patterns, word choice, formatting quirks, and the way instructions are structured. Beginners sometimes assume attackers always write perfectly or always write poorly, but the reality varies widely, and many campaigns have consistent stylistic fingerprints even when the sender address changes. Stylometry can also help identify when a message is likely machine-generated or heavily templated, which can influence how you respond and what kinds of defenses are effective. The deeper value is that writing style is another observable behavior, and defenders use observables to build links. Stylometry becomes especially useful when combined with technical evidence. because style alone can be misleading if you treat it as proof. A phishing email might share phrases with another campaign because attackers copied a template, not because it is the same operator. The safer approach is to treat stylometry as a clustering tool, where it suggests relationships that should be confirmed with other signals like sender infrastructure, linked destinations, or file attachments. Beginners should also understand that stylometry can help in internal investigations, such as recognizing a business email compromise attempt where an attacker imitates a trusted executive's tone but gets certain habits wrong. That kind of analysis can support better user education and better detection patterns, because you can describe what made the message suspicious in a concrete way. Stylometry can also reduce response time when it helps you quickly categorize a message as part of a known pattern, allowing you to search for similar messages across mailboxes. In this way, stylometry is not about literature analysis. It is about turning human language artifacts into evidence that can guide technical investigation. When you treat style as one more signal, it becomes a practical part of defender thinking. Reverse engineering is often the most intimidating term in the title, but beginners can understand it as a structured way of answering what a piece of software is trying to do and how it does it. At the highest level, reverse engineering is the process of studying a program from the outside and inside, looking at its structure, its logic, and its behaviors to infer its intent and capabilities. This can include examining file metadata, observing runtime actions, analyzing embedded strings, and mapping out which functions the program performs. Beginners sometimes think reverse engineering requires deep math skills or secret knowledge, but the core goal is simply to remove uncertainty about capability. If you know a file attempts credential theft, you respond differently than if it only performs harmless diagnostics. If you know it establishes persistence, you search for specific follow-on artifacts. Reverse engineering helps you move from generic labels like malware to specific statements like it contacts this destination, tries to capture credentials, and modifies these settings. That specificity makes the entire incident response more effective. A practical defender also understands that reverse engineering exists on a spectrum, and not every case requires the deepest possible analysis. In some incidents, behavioral evidence and IoC extraction are enough to contain and eradicate the threat quickly, while deeper reverse engineering may be used later to improve detections and prevent recurrence. In other cases, reverse engineering becomes urgent when you cannot confidently identify what the artifact does, especially if it appears to be novel or targeted. Beginners should also recognize that reverse engineering is not always about the executable itself. It can include analyzing scripts, macros, configuration blobs, and encoded payloads that drive behavior. Another important point is that attackers often use obfuscation, which means they try to hide what the code is doing, but defenders can still learn a lot by focusing on outcomes and required behaviors. Even heavily disguised programs still need to execute certain actions to succeed, such as accessing files, making network connections, or interacting with authentication systems. Reverse engineering helps you uncover those required behaviors so your defenses can focus on the actions that matter, not just the surface appearance. These four ideas fit together best when you see them as parts of a single analysis loop rather than as separate specialties. Sandboxing gives you a quick behavioral snapshot in a controlled environment, which helps you prioritize and gather initial evidence. IoC extraction converts that evidence into searchable identifiers, which helps you find related activity and determine scope. Stylometry adds a human language lens that can connect social engineering artifacts and campaign patterns, strengthening your understanding of how the attack reached victims. Reverse engineering provides deeper capability insight that can explain why certain behaviors occurred and what to expect next. Beginners sometimes treat analysis as a one-way process where you start with a file and end with a label, but real analysis is circular. What you find in scope hunting changes what you look for in reverse engineering, and what you learn in reverse engineering changes what IOCs you prioritize. The practical outcome is that you respond with increasing confidence and decreasing guesswork. That is what good artifact analysis does for a team. It turns confusion into a clearer, evidence-backed narrative. Artifact analysis also plays an important role in improving future defenses, because every incident is an opportunity to sharpen detection and reduce repeat risk. If sandboxing reveals a consistent process chain, You can build monitoring that alerts when that chain appears in your environment. If IoC extraction reveals a pattern of destinations or file names, you can add targeted searches and blocks with an expiration strategy so you don't accumulate stale indicators. If Stylometry reveals consistent language tricks in phishing attempts, you can train users and tune filters toward those patterns without relying on a single sender address. If reverse engineering reveals a specific persistence method, you can harden systems to reduce that persistence surface and add checks that detect it early. Beginners sometimes think the investigation ends when the attacker is removed, but mature defense treats removal as only one goal. The other goal is learning, because learning is how you reduce the chance that the same attacker, or a similar one, succeeds again. Artifact analysis is therefore both response and prevention, because it feeds your monitoring and hardening efforts with real evidence. To conclude, analyzing incident artifacts is about turning suspicious objects into clear answers that guide safe action, and the 4 concepts in this title are different lenses for finding those answers. Sandboxing helps you observe behavior safely and quickly. IoC extraction helps you convert observations into searches that reveal scope. Stylometry helps you connect and interpret written artifacts that often start attacks. And reverse engineering helps you understand capability and intent when surface evidence is not enough. For beginners, the most important skill is not mastering every technical detail, but building a disciplined workflow that preserves evidence, tests hypotheses, and communicates findings clearly. When you approach artifacts as evidence with limits, you avoid both overconfidence and paralysis because you know what you observed and what remains uncertain. Over time, this habit makes you a stronger defender because you learn to move from one clue to the next without losing rigor. The real win is that your organization becomes harder to attack, not because you have perfect tools, but because you can understand what happened, contain it faster, and improve defenses based on what the evidence truly showed.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.